A famous archaeologist once said this of the country of Jordan. I quote, "One can hardly dig the soil anywhere in Jordan without turning up some vestige of the ancient past." He's right. Many civilizations have flourished and perished on the soil of Jordan, leaving ancient ruins everywhere in the country as a reminder of their past glory. All across Jordan, archaeological remains belonging to different civilizations and ages dot the landscape, making for a very beautiful sight indeed. They are all beautiful, all important and special and worth investigating. However, there is one certain unique place in southwest Jordan, halfway between the Red Sea and the Dead Sea. An ancient city so unique and so special that most archaeologists have agreed amongst themselves that there is no place quite like it in the whole world. It is the ancient city of Petra. Its builders were the ancient Arab Bedouin Nabataeans. The question is, why is Petra so unique, and why were the Nabataeans so special in every respect? This is what I set out to do just this past summer. I have always been meaning to study the Nabataean ancient history, and I have always been meaning to visit their city of El Petra. And when I found out that a friend of mine was living in ancient Elgi, modern-day Wadi Musa, it kind of gave the project a good boost, especially when he welcomed the visit and extended an invitation actually for me to visit him. That's when I knew things were heading off to a good start. I started out with a hard research work and had lengthy discussions with archaeologists and historians about the subject matter, and became really wholly ready for the trip down south. As soon as I hit the highway going south, the geographical physical features of Jordan's Rift Valley began to unfold before me. Some refer to it as Al Ghor Depression. It is basically lowlands surrounded by high elevations. The depression runs north to south parallel to the Mediterranean coast and is cut by several wadis running from east to west, with the Jordanian plateau rising in heights between 2,500 to 5,000 feet above sea level. The Rift Valley was caused by the pulling apart process of the margins of the tectonic plates of the continent of East Africa and Asia. Both continents' plates moving separately, causing earthquakes and lifting more and more sedimentary rocks up to the surface, creating some of the most memorable geographical sites in the Near East. In fact, in certain southern parts, the landscape looks as if it belongs to another planet. The local rocks of Petra changed from limestone to a mixture of granite and sandstone, and the new texture accounts for the brilliant colorations of the rocks at Petra. After a long, hard drive, I have finally arrived at my final destination, Wadi Musa, ancient Elgi, and my dear friend Osama Al-Maaya was there to greet me at the hotel's door. And as expected, he's done all the necessary arrangements for my accommodation and comfort. We talked some about what we'll be doing for the next few days, but he interrupted me and advised me to get up to my room and get some rest because I will be needing all of my physical strength for that exploring trip. And not only that, but he assured me that he will accompany me on my tour if his work schedule allowed for some free time. Now, what are friends for? That the Nabataeans were ancient Bedouin Arabs who came from the Arabian Peninsula is an undisputable fact. However, historians and archaeologists have disagreed where in that huge tract of land did they really come from. Some suggested the northeast of the peninsula, around and about the Mesopotamia Valley. Well, to cut a long story short, as this is the first in a series of controversies about the Nabataeans, I tell you that as a result of many recent studies on the subject matter, it is now generally agreed that southern Arabia was the original starting place of the Nabataeans, and that later they moved up to northwest of the peninsula, and from there they gradually infiltrated into the former biblical land of Edom, modern-day southern Jordan. And eventually, Petra became their stopping place. Why did they move into this area? And when did this migration take place? That's another controversy, by the way. The biblical kingdoms of Edom and Moab, which were there before the Nabataeans, were exhausted by wars with their neighboring states over many centuries. And they just had no more stamina to continue. So there was a void up there, a void that the Nabataeans happily filled, and did so gradually. When was that? We do not know for sure, but by the 4th century BC they were actively engaged in the trade caravanneering business, and that's roughly speaking. Surely the Nabataeans were cognizant of the importance of this lucrative caravan trade business. Here I believe we must pause for a while and take stock of the situation in ancient Arabian Peninsula to really complete this background story. A quick look at the map of the ancient world would show us that the Arabian Peninsula lay between two rich geographic regions. One is the Mediterranean basin and all that lay north of it. The other is the monsoon region and all that lay south of it. Both regions had large populations and both produced different crops and different consumer products which were needed in the countries of both regions. A simple commercial barter system could have easily solved the consumer needs in the countries of both regions with ease, had it not been for the fact that a huge desert belt stretched all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the western borders of China. A desert belt which was difficult as well as perilous to cross. But divine providence has so ordained that the desert barrier be offset by two water outlets. One is the Arabian-Persian Gulf, linking the caravan trade route from the ports of southern Arabia with the Mesopotamian valley cities, and from there on to North Syria and upwards to Asia Minor. The second water outlet is the Red Sea, linking the incoming ships from India and China into the ports of southern Arabia with Palestine, Sinai, and Egypt. So obviously, the Arabian Peninsula lay between east and west, and its desert cameleers happily facilitated the trade between the countries of both regions, at a profit, of course. However, another factor worked in favor of the ancient merchants of the Arabian Peninsula. It was that frankincense and myrrh were grown only in southern Arabia. In antiquity, frankincense and myrrh belonged to the most expensive and most demanded spices ever. They were not only indispensable for sacrifice in divine worship, but they were also burnt at funerals, profane festivities and burnt in honor of living persons and rulers, and used to a great extent in the preparation of medicines, all of which brought about the development of an active and far-reaching trade along what was known in antiquity as the incense trail. Our beloved city of Petra played a special role in all of this. This easily defended basin of Petra was strategically located on the northern portion of the incense trail, at a point where traffic on the incense trail broke into three separate streams. One heading west to Sinai and Egypt, and one northeast to Damascus and the cities along the Tigris and the Euphrates. Another northwest to Palestine and the Mediterranean coast. Such a natural fortress in such a strategic spot was certain to become important and desired. As we all know from our history classes, that after the death of Alexander the Great, Kol Syria came under the dominance of his competing generals, the Seleucids up north and the Ptolemies in the south and Egypt. Both Hellenist dynasties were busy fighting each other. And this has allowed the Nabataeans to expand and consolidate their caravan business links and grew rich and powerful. Turned urbanized, so that by the end of the first quarter of the 2nd century BC, their kingdom was a matter of fact. Petra was its capital. And we're already in control of vast areas of Al-Hawran, the region around Hegra, Madain al-Saleh, the Negev desert, and the Sinaitic caravan routes. And they were already battling the Ptolemaic navy in the Red Sea to secure their ever-growing commercial interests. Okay, now that we've covered the essential background information, I believe it is now high time to check and explore this unique ancient city, Petra, or as the Nabataeans referred to the city in antiquity, Al-Raqim, which literally means of varied colors. I am now walking down the stream bed of Wadi Musa, heading straight towards Asig, the entrance of the ancient city. Turning sharply to the west, the stream bed entered Petra's most famous Sig, that narrow cleft in the rocks which for thousands of years has provided Petra with an impregnable defense. In antiquity, an arch spanned the entrance of this deep and narrow gorge, whose abutments can still be seen today. The arch collapsed back in 1896. Slashed like a sword cut through the mountain, this ancient and now dry watercourse has vertical sides hundreds of feet deep and in places a few yards apart. For much of its length, the sides are overchanging, shutting out the sky except for occasional brilliant shafts of light which illuminate the oleanders and fig plants clinging still in the rocks. The gorge widens and narrows, twists and turns all throughout, as if a serpent has cut through it and modeled the landscape of it. Really amazing. And there was this strange feeling all along that I was crossing the time barrier into the realm of ancient world. Caused by the ridge rupture and opened up by seismic activity and smoothed by flood torrents, which also smoothed the limestone walls but left them uneven so that masses of rock hung over the trail. A stretch of the pavement of the original ancient Sieg road paving is visible as a result of recent excavation work. The brilliant colors of the rock are just amazing, and they confront the eyes of the tourists everywhere they go. There is no escaping them. A water channel has been cut through the rock at the foot of the mountain, and its descent is consistent with the fall of the ground of the Sieg. It is part of that huge Nabataean harvesting system. And that's one main thing we need to know about the Nabataeans. They were astute hydrological engineers, the best of their time. In a spontaneous event, my camera caught a glimpse of a tourist who stopped to marvel at the multicolored striations of the rock. The twisting path constantly reveals new and exciting geological spectacles. It just never ends. Votive niches appear at irregular intervals carved into the walls of the towering cliffs, and there are plenty of them all along the Sieg cliffs walls. Stairs leading into nowhere. Wild plants. Towering mountaintops. And agricultural terraces are all typical Nabataean trademarks. I knew that after a while that I should suddenly come to a sunlit clearing, but didn't know when. Then my eyes caught what looked like part of a huge carved monument. A shock swept over me as I hurried to check it out. But really, people, I was just not prepared for the staggering, monumental, and awesome beauty of the scene which burst upon me as I emerged from the narrow exit of a Sieg. There, framed between two dark cliff-like walls, and glowing with reflected light, was the much admired, much talked about facade of Al-Khazne, the treasury. Exquisitely sculpted from the living rocks. It rises some 90 feet high. The monument is two-storied. A row of 6 superbly proportioned columns with very beautiful, almost intact Corinthian tops. The second story consists of two side pavilions, complete with columns and pediments, and flanking a round central pavilion with a peculiar Nabataean broken pediment, and whose tent-like roof culminated in a decorated urn. The treasury, so called because the Bedouins who lived inside the site of Petra long ago thought that the urn or something up there contained a treasure, and they actually fired at it with their guns to crack it open, of course to no avail. The treasury is still the center of a raging controversy among archaeologists and historians as to the nature and the purpose of this celebrated unique monument. You see, it's not a temple because it does not have the usual layout of a temple. And it's not a tomb either because there is no evidence of a burial floor or loculi. Then what was it for? After much heated debate among scholars and professionals, a strong possibility has been established that the treasury has been carved and done to serve as a cult temple for the worship of one of their Nabataean kings, Obodas I, who was deified after having defeated the Greeks, the Seleucids, in battle. Some scholars inferred this from the shallow basin and the drain below the threshold for ritual purification and for the offering of libations. And mainly, they inferred that from the significance of the iconography of the facade. The Baroque-rich architectural decoration of Al-Khazna is Alexandrian Hellenist in style. There is no monument like Al-Khazna, ancient and modern. It is truly the pride and joy and the most celebrated monument of Petra. Leaving the magnificent Khazna behind, I continued towards the basin of Petra, or you could say downtown Petra, that is. To get there, one has to go through the outer Sieg, so called probably because it isn't as confined and as long as the Sieg proper. The sight of tourists from every nationality you can think of is quite nice. It's also a site very typical of Petra, as you shall soon discover. As the Sieg widened and opened up, a remarkable collection of crow-stepped Assyrian-type tombs came into sight. Carved directly into the surface of the rock, these tombs represent an earlier type of Nabataean architecture called pylon-type tomb. That's when the facade is usually decorated with one or two rows of crow steps, maybe a Hellenist door frame, and may have a carved pediment supported by pilasters. I think that it is better now to get a general understanding of the ancient Nabataean architectural style before we get deeper and deeper into Petra. An understanding of the evolution of their architectural style will make both of our jobs a lot more easier and much more interesting. Generally speaking, the trading activities and the wealth of the Nabataeans had made it possible for the Nabataeans to observe and absorb other cultures, architectural styles, and construction technology. This has enabled them to incorporate some foreign elements into their architectural style. Here this is called adoption. However, the Nabataean designers and engineers would then select from those foreign decorative elements only that which suited their local environment and taste. Here it is called adaptation. in addition, of course, to their Nabataean touch. So you find that the Nabataean tomb facades, their component parts architecturally and decoratively, were an eclectic fusion of Hellenistic and Oriental, as interpreted and as executed by indigenous craftsmen. So, the Nabataean style was really a derivative one, derived from Hellenistic, Persian, Egyptian sources, plus that local touch and taste. The first Nabataean architectural expression was the Assyrian-type tomb, as in the case of those tombs which abound at the end of the outer siege. The dominant feature here is a band of multiple crow steps which cap the composition, a mere ornament, or it could have two rows of multiple crow steps with a wide plain sub-attic story between the two. A major development in architectural style came with the introduction of the cavito cornice, Egypt here being the source of inspiration. The Nabataeans have always kept their line of communication open to the east, even though they would, over time, increasingly embrace the Hellenism of the West. Phase 2 of the cavito cornice came with the introduction of feigned classical pilasters on either side of the facade, supporting a simplified entablature and columns. 3. The double cornice phase came with the introduction of an additional cornice across the sub-attic below the cavito cornice, with the capitals of the pilasters resting on double cushions, maybe a Hellenist doorframe with a pediment and acroterions, with the capitals having stiff floral scroll work. Phase 2 of the double cornice type saw the introduction of not only the four pilaster facade, but the altering of the treatment of the outer pilasters and such. The last important architectural style development is called Nabataean classical, as in the case of Al-Khazne, the Corinthian tomb at Deir and Bab es-Sig triclinium. It is generally agreed that this architectural trend came about and coincided with the Nabataeans enjoying their period of greatest territorial expansion and prosperity, and with a direct contact with first-class Western art. And there was a desire, probably on the part of the politicians, to feature the classical Western decorative touch. And so, Al-Khazne, the ultimate product, was born. This architectural trend was characterized by Baroque Western classical embellishments. And there was that feeling that the essence of the Hellenist style lay in the treatment of the cornice. This they overburdened with broken lines and angles, projections, and multiplied pediments and pedestals set upon columns, and so on. This evolution from east to west was all throughout marked by the local craftsmen tenacity who continued to interpret what they saw and the forms from which the individual elements were derived according to their local needs. After that, there happened a gradual trend towards simpler forms of decoration throughout their work. As for the Roman architectural influence, well, the Roman architecture had an entirely different relationship to the Nabataean tradition. It never really wholly became absorbed into it. Well, that does it for the architectural lesson thing. And that does it too for the day number 1 inside the site of Petra. Petra is a huge archaeological site. Tourists need a few days to cover it right. But honest to God, people, according to my experience, the genuinely interested tourists need at least to spend 10 days there to faithfully cover it and explore this ancient city. The next day I was really happy when I learned that my friend Osama was now free, ready, and willing to accompany me on my tour. It's just good to have around us someone who is knowledgeable and familiar with the site. That was a relief. We have agreed that Petra is a huge archaeological site and could not possibly be covered in a short period of time by most tourists. However, there are certain places and monuments inside Petra that are essential to visit, that no tourist should miss out on, like for instance Al-Khazni. In addition to Al-Khazni, there are two mountains that must be climbed to get to their tops. One is called Jabal al-Dir, mountain of the monastery, and the other is called Jabal al-Madbah, mountain of the altar, or the high place. Well, right now we've just started the steep climb up to get to the top of the mountain where the high place is. And although some claim that the climb up is hard physical labor, well, that may be so, but the climb up is necessary to get to the top because that's where the high place is, number one, and number two, and because every step up is like an adventure, with many breathtaking views, scenes along the way up. The ascent is well designed with Nabataean flight of steps, carved into the rock to get around and over the difficult patches. In antiquity, care was taken that the route up was regarded as a religious processional way to the high place of sacrifice, presumably to put the ascending worshippers in the right frame of mind for the impending ceremonies at the top. On the way up, tourists will marvel at the most amazing scenes of Lower Petra and its huge monuments. So majestic and grand are the views that you just have to sit down for a few moments to enjoy them from up here. When tourists do sit down to watch, they usually feel dwarfed by the magnificence of it all. You're watching the original ancient Nabataean flight of steps. There is no maintenance, modern maintenance work here. More fantastic scenes of the lower parts of the mountain. The climb up continued, and we're still amazed at the bizarre surroundings, beautiful surroundings. This is an ancient Nabataean quarry from which they cut off their stones. Access to the top is marked by two obelisks called nephesh in ancient Aramic language. In modern-day Arabic language, it would translate into nefes, meaning spirit and soul, and they were meant to be memorials to the deceased. What is most remarkable about them is that in order for the Nabataeans to create them, the whole mountaintop had to be carved away. You can imagine what a laborious job it must have been. Finally, we're at the top, the high place, Al-Madbah, the best preserved high place to have survived from biblical days. Ancient Semitic religions always used high places for worship. Well, these days, another advantage of the site for tourists would be the enjoyment of the magnificent views down over the central city area, which is guarded from east to west by towering mountain ranges, deep wadis, distant ridges. It's just another Petraean sight from up here. The sacred precinct comprises a shallow courtyard carved out of a rocky platform. The altar stands above the level of the courtyard and is fitted with a square hole thought to be a socket hole into which a portable deity block was inserted. To the south of the altar, a washing basin for the sacrificial bloodletting and the necessary washing afterwards. We are now descending Jabal al-Madbah on our way to see the last monument for this tour, Ad-Dair, the monastery. And as expected of any section of Petra, the way down the mountain is full of surprises and bizarre geological formations. A water channel and a seemingly endless flight of ancient Nabataean steps. Truthfully, people, I have never ever seen anything like this before. I'm just so happy that I finally got a chance at covering this ancient, unique city. There is no place quite like Petra in the whole world. And that is an undisputed fact. The garden triclinium is in the distance. Okay, now we've just started our ascent of Jabal al-Dair with the expected Petraean setting and scenery. The Nabataean flight of steps leading up to God knows where, flocks of exhausted tourists seeming very worn out on their way back to their hotels, steep-walled, colorful cliffs, traces of earthquake damage, more tourists. This site is throbbing with life most of the day, most of the year. Somewhere along the way up, I chose one nice quiet corner and sat down to enjoy the setting and to catch my breath as well. I wanted to fill my eyes with the sight of rock formations and the colorful striations of the rock. And as I did just that, the fantastic quietude was being interrupted by the siren songs of the birds hovering above me. It was so serene, so soothing, so healing. I could stay here doing this for a long time without any complaints. It was just a nice, quiet moment of reflection and a beautiful scene altogether. There are plenty of nice, quiet corners on the way up any Petraean mountain. The flight of steps reappear and it's time to continue the climb up. Bizarre rock formations, agricultural terraces, or rather traces of them. More flights of steps. The royal tombs can be seen from up here, and it's just another fantastic view. Scary looking mountaintops. A rest house where you can rest for a little while, drink something, and before one reaches the top of the dare, the left side of the mountain hill peels away to reveal a wide, awesome ledge, or maybe an abyss-like ledge, from which one can look down into the depth of Petra basin, and it's just another magnificent view from up here. And again, it's so soothing, so serene, so healing. On the other side of the chasm rise steep-walled, strange-looking mountains of strange shapes and colors. Again, you have to sit down here for a few moments to appreciate the whole atmosphere. This is truly a case of seeing is believing thing here. It's just so beautiful. At last, I've reached the top. And there it was, at Dare, Petra's biggest carved monument, the monastery. Unlike Al-Khazne, the monument is stripped of almost all of the classical Western embellishments, leaving the sheer size of it to impress the viewer. And like Al-Khazne, it had a particular sanctity to it for the Nabataeans, in the sense that it served as a place of assembly for a religious fraternity or association dedicated to the cult of the worship of Ubudas I. It was built late 1st century AD. The temple has one large plain room. On the far side of it, there is a wide niche with steps leading to it. Another important thing, the best time to watch the monument is during the late afternoon hours. That's when the sun sets it aglow and gives it an extremely attractive reddish color. A must to witness. I just had to climb up to the top of this huge monument because I knew that he who gets up there would be guaranteed a marvelous sight. And a marvelous sight indeed it was. Watching the sunset from up here is so thrilling. Plus plenty and plenty of other magnificent views. Having seen what the Nabataeans did in Petra, I could tell that those ancient Nabataeans were special people who possessed a very liberal, industrious mentality. They came out of the desert, became successful businessmen and traders, accumulated wealth and knew how to manage their wealth. established a strong kingdom, one which was feared in antiquity. They made available water in arid land and were the masters of hydrology. Developed successful agriculture even in remote desert areas. It's just one fantastic success story. The Nabataeans must have been very talented, resolved, and busy people, because their success story didn't last for very long. Rome, which already had the final say in the political affairs of the Near East client states, decided to end the Nabataean kingdom because it stood in the way. It was Rome's strategy in the first place to turn the whole of the Mediterranean basin into a Roman sphere of influence. And that happened in 106 AD. It was the end of the Nabataean kingdom. This is the only restaurant, high-quality restaurant inside the site, strictly to serve the tourists the right way. The Jordanian government has always appreciated the importance of the site and did the best that it could to develop it, according to its means and priorities. But recently, the advent of peace in the Middle East has no doubt accelerated those efforts, because Petra all of a sudden took on a greater importance tourism-wise. In the mid-80s, UNESCO declared Petra a member in the International Cultural Heritage List, and work on developing the site suddenly became more serious and professional. Dr. Kamil Al-Mahadin, who heads the Petra Regional Council, PRC, established late 1995, told and explained to me everything. That's basically what he said. What we're doing right now is we're concentrating on Wadi Musa. Why? We're planning and implementing a good, strong infrastructure there because there is more people in it. There has been quite an increase in the population there. Many new hotels sprang up recently, more tourists, suddenly more of everything. So we're building a strong infrastructure for the whole basin. Once you've taken care of Wadi Musa there, Petra automatically benefits. And after that, we will come down here to do more development work. It's just a matter of time. Work is non-stop. We're planning and working, and we will not stop until the Petra National Park objective is achieved to the best of international standards. Funding is handled by the Jordanian government and other international sources. It's good to hear people like Dr. Mahadin speak of development plans, protection policies for the site. Why? Because Petra is too important to be left alone. It must be maintained, consolidated, loved and protected. Petra is such a beautiful, unique site. And most important of all, it doesn't belong only to Jordan and Jordanians. Petra belongs to the whole world.